So, I talked about as a kid going to, being the scholarship kid in private school, being the lonely, only Latina sometimes, feeling like that. Do you feel like that now, as you're the only Latina, la única representante in the Fortune 500?
No, it's amazing. First of all, thank you for having me. It is amazing, and there will be more. It's been incredible, and it's a real privilege, and the Latino community should be very proud, for sure. It's a great privilege.
Talk a little bit about your journey on the way here to the C-suite. When you were a kid, did you think, like Sandra, I want to be a CEO?
So it's funny, I was just amazed with the similarities in what I heard. I didn't know what a CEO was, but I was that little kid at 6 years old. I had literally an attaché case, and we walk around. So I knew I wanted to be a boss, but I didn't know what exactly. But I grew up as a renter. My parents came to the mainland from Puerto Rico in the 1950s. They were poor. They came here for a better life, like many immigrants. And they bought their first home when I was about 4 years old. And like the American dream, that home then paid for education. And I've had a 30-plus year career in finance. I did finance, law, real estate. And I discovered housing about 20 years ago, and I've made a career out of it.
And you also did a lot of housing in your previous job going to Latin America. That was part of your we call it a beat, but your territory. Right?
Yeah. So the first 15 years of my career was all Latin American project finance, like building big projects, tollways, airports.
Which banks?
So I started out as a lawyer at a global law firm, and did that for 15 years, became a partner. There were very few women, so we should talk about that. In the 1990s, it wasn't about being Latino, it was more about the fact that there was a woman at this global firm. And I did that for about, as I said, 15 years, and I took a break when I had children, 2 children, and that's how I discovered housing. That leave of absence opened up this whole other career. And since then, I've been at JP Morgan. I ran 2 businesses there. I had a short stint in state government. I ran the New York State Housing Finance Agency, and now Fannie Mae.
So explain to people Fannie Mae's role, because they're on the Fortune 500, and yet I also think of them as partly sort of being a little bit not social, but working with the government to make sure people could get into homes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So first of all, for the young people in the house, Fannie Mae is not Sallie Mae. That's number one. Sallie Mae's in student loans, we're in home mortgage. Just to clarify, I'm amazed. We're so, as you mentioned, we are so important in the country, and many Americans don't know who we are. So high level, we don't deal with the consumer directly. Lenders make mortgages. We buy the mortgages so that the lenders could keep making more mortgages. So we're a stable source of financing for mortgage credit. We were founded in 1938. It was during the Great Depression, when over a quarter of households were in foreclosure. So President FDR and the American dream, having that stability for families, everyone should have a home, and this 30-year fixed rate mortgages, this is the only place in the world that has that. Right. So we started out as a government agency back in the 30s, and then in the late 60s, we became a private capital, government-sponsored chartered company. And then 15 years ago, why the confusion? It was in our finest day, and during the
financial crisis when you had housing implode.
Yeah, so we went into conservatorship, and what that means is that about 70+% of our ownership is owned by the U.S. Treasury. There's a conservator, the rest is publicly held, and our regulator, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, is both our regulator and our conservator. So they hire professional management, me and the team, to run the company, and any major decisions, we work very closely with them. The good news is, 15 years later, the Fannie Mae who we are today. So the one you remember was underregulated, now with the benefit of hindsight, was underregulated, undergoverned, undercapitalized. Today, 15 years later, we are well-regulated, we are well-governed with all the risk and controls, and we should be. We're 4.3 trillion in assets, 1.4 mortgages, as you mentioned, and we are every day retaining our earnings to build capital. So it's a different company, but what excites me most, the new Fannie Mae today is leaning into why we were created, which is to create housing opportunities for all. And that mission and that purpose and the business that we're running really excites me.
You know, I had the opportunity to talk to the head of FAHA. I can never remember.
Director Thompson, yeah.
Yeah, Director Thompson. And she talked about some of the things that are happening now. And one of the things is, I think about, you know, young Latinos, young people anywhere who are saddled with that debt to Sallie Mae and who may not be able to have a credit record and that are renters. Mm-hmm. There are programs now to try to make that count so that they can get a credit rating. Is that helping them get into home ownership?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we, at Fannie Mae, one of our main strategic objectives is to find what we call the credit invisible. So there are 44 million renters in this country. They're paying their rent. That rent didn't count until now, it counts now. Okay. Didn't count, and a housing payment's a housing payment. So one thing Fannie Mae did, we started this about 2 years ago, where two things: if you're a renter, you can count your rent, so that if you didn't have a credit score, now we have people with credit scores, because they started counting their rents, and those who did have a credit score saw their credit score go up by 40 points, which is quite significant. In addition, we started making eligible, if you can demonstrate, now with technology, with bank statements, if you give us permission, we can see that you're making your monthly payments. And so we at Fannie Mae, we take that credit risk, and we have now, we will make you eligible if you share that information with us and become eligible, and we're seeing it. So we call it, it's positive rent payment, and it really has made a difference.
And yet it's at a time when there's so much uncertainty in the economy.
Yeah.
Interest rates are getting so high, and it feels as though home affordability just keeps getting one step ahead of these programs.
Yeah, that's true. Right now, housing is a tale of two markets, right? For those of you who own a home and have a mortgage, things are pretty good, right? You probably have a mortgage at a 2, 3, or 4%. You've built a lot of equity in your home. You're in a good spot. You're probably not feeling inflation as much as others because your cost, which, you know, for most households in this country, housing is their biggest expense. Right. Exactly. If you're not a homeowner and you're a renter, you're very cost burdened today, especially Latinos. Like 50% of their income in housing and rent, that's a lot. It doesn't leave much for other things. I would say what we're doing at Fannie Mae is still working with those who are not homeowners, create programs. So for example, there's a myth that you need a 20% down payment. So we have Home Ready, it's one of our flagship programs. We're 3% if you're a first-time homeowner. So we're trying to do what we can do, whether it's through education, making sure consumers know, even though rates are high right now, and there's very little supply and prices are high because there's little inventory, there's things that you can be doing to build your credit. Because I think a lot of consumers don't quite appreciate steps that they take in their everyday lives could have an impact when they do apply for a mortgage.
I want to open up in case anyone has questions. We have folks with mics. A couple questions over here. We've got.
Thank you. For first-gen Latinos, we come from a culture of like never owe anything, you know, no debt. You know, obviously I've had to grow into it. I did get student loans, you know, I had to grow into getting comfortable with like building up my credit and things like that. I'm an entrepreneur, so of course also getting comfortable with, you know, the things that we have to maneuver. What advice do you have for Latinos and Latinas when we come from this culture where we're kind of afraid, I feel sometimes. Even when I talk to younger people today, I feel like they're really afraid of building up like that credit, you know, story. So what do you say?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's actually, and you're so spot on about the Latino culture and that mindset. So at Fannie Mae, we're very much data driven. And when you look at the data, we believe, and there are studies out there, Urban Institute came out with a study that by 2040, 70% of net new households will be Latino. So we started studying Latinos and why is there still a 20% gap, home ownership gap, between white households and Latino households. There's been progress. So I must say, I was listening very closely to Sid. There has been progress amongst the Latino cohort because why? They're resilient. They put their resources together. Housing is culturally like family. I mean, the word housing, I think it's like bienes raíces, it's roots. So culturally, housing for Latinos is how they build generational wealth. That said, they're worried about credit. So one thing we have done, and they have thin credit as a result. So what we started doing is we put together this educational program, and it's all about credit. What's good credit? What's soft credit? What's hard credit? So, and it's in Spanish, and it's been translated by Spanish speakers, native speakers, not some translation where if you've read, it never sounds very good. And we did that because today, 94% of Latino households say they still speak Spanish at home. So we wanted to make sure they had this information that was very approachable to answer those questions they have about building their credit, doing it responsibly and safely, and that's what we hope to do, because you're right, that is one of the myths that we need to help correct in the Latino community, and that's part of what we're doing.
We have aquí in front. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I feel like Vanna White.
Sorry. Thank you. So as the only Hispanic or Latina CEO, what do you think, where are we? Why are we not represented in the C-suite? And what are steps that the community, whether Hispanic or non-Hispanic, needs to take to make sure that we actually, because if we're 20% of the population, why are we not at least 20% of the C-suite, right? So can you maybe share your perspective from your journey?
Yeah, look, that's why the work that Ased is doing in the report is super important, bringing corporate America to understand this. I mean, there was another organization had a report about 2 weeks ago that said the Latino cohort, if we were a country, we would be the 5th largest country in the world. So businesses today, if they're
Latinos in the U.S.
Latinos in the U.S., thank you, yes. Latinos in the U.S., it's like something like 3 trillion would be the economy. So today, businesses who ignore the Latino consumer is just really missing the boat, because that is the economic power. By the way, Latinos are having great educational attainment at a higher pace than the general population. Home ownership, again, there's still a gap, but higher increases in home ownership, and also in income growth. So it is happening. That is why it's so important for companies to be very intentional. I agree with a lot of the comments said earlier. So at Fannie Mae, because it is so important, if 70% of our households will be Latino, we look at our workforce, we look at our suppliers, and we create programs. So for example, we issue securities. That's how we fund ourselves. We have a program, access program, where we have broker dealers that are people of color, women businesses, Latinos. Today, 1/3 of our broker dealers in that program are Latino owned. But that was not by accident. It was very intentional. Our supply diversity program, we set a goal for ourselves. Financial services, it's about 10% supply diversity. We're at 17%. It didn't happen by accident. So more and more, I think ASED and other organizations are building this awareness, right? The businesses are out there. The talent is out there. It's having people like us in these positions to bring that pipeline and just keep lifting that pipeline. It is happening. We talked about board service. I love the comments from the women earlier about knowing what you hope to do and how you see yourself. 10 years ago, I wanted to be a public board member. It's taken me, took 10 years for me to get my first public board seat. But I did tell people about, if there's ever, what do I need to do to prepare? So being intentional and being at the board seat, I agree with that comment about credibility. And the more of us that are out there, I look forward to when I'm not the only CEO, the only Latina CEO, and I know it will happen. But then the board, because that's where these decisions are ultimately made.
I just want to close out on, did you ever think of yourself as a big role model? And how hard is it being the only one, la única?
So it's funny, I don't take myself very seriously. what I will say, I noticed most recently when I joined Fannie Mae and we had our town hall and all the employees wanted to take photos, I was amazed that it wasn't just women, it was a lot of men in their 30s or so, and they were taking photos with me to show their daughters. And for some reason, it was those younger dads at Fannie Mae that I'm like, holy cow. Like to them it's a big deal, and they're going home to share with their daughters. So that's when I finally said, I have this responsibility.
That's way better than the Barbie movie. Way better story.
So,
Priscilla, Almodovar, thank you so much.
thank you.
for joining us.
Thank you.